Stop, you haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Subscribe now, we have new stories every day. Now let's go. Ellison and I, Jack, have been married for 4 years. We're both in our early 20s and are enjoying married life. We both have good jobs and had plans. I've been working hard to get promoted to vice president, giving it my all. Ellison's salary as a seamstress at a local factory was being saved for a down payment on a house. In about 6 months, we should be able to buy a house, and after my promotion, we'll be able to live on one salary, giving her the chance to stop working and start a family. She loves children and wants more than anything to become a mother. She understands that we need to be financially secure, but if it weren't for me insisting, she wouldn't care. It was a Friday in early April, and I woke up early to go to work. Today was an important day in the race for the promotion because I had to give a presentation on the new product we'd been working on. 3 teams were participating in the presentation, and it was clear that the leader of the winning team would get the vice president position. We had worked hard, and our presentation was scheduled for 10 in the morning. When I came out of the bathroom, Ellison was already awake and said, "Good luck with your presentation, and don't forget to come home early. I want to invite you out to celebrate and discuss something." I knew that after the presentation, I would be exhausted, and leaving early would be difficult. But Ellison had been very understanding about the early mornings, late nights, and everything else that comes with the high stress of someone's life. I owed her a lot and was really looking forward to a calm, peaceful night. The presentation went well, and 2 senior members of the board of directors congratulated me, which indicated that we were very close to winning. When I got home around 5:30, I was in a great mood. As I walked up the stairs, I saw that my wife was dressed to the nines and ready to go. Seeing her, I whistled and asked, "So, where are we going?" She flashed me an irresistible smile and replied, "To that new French restaurant. You've worked so hard to secure our future that I thought you deserved something special. I prefer burgers and fries, but Ellison wanted a special evening, and I could give that to her." It was clear that her plans included a little romance, and I was eagerly looking forward to it. I went to the bathroom to freshen up and change. I thought I heard Ellison talking, but I didn't pay much attention. The restaurant, with a large parking lot, was located not far from Castle Street. It's small, but the food is delicious. I had dinner there about a month ago for a business meeting and was anticipating a romantic evening. When we walked in, there were only 2 other couples, and we were seated in a quiet corner at the back. We talked about the presentation and how it went. We picked appetizers and main courses from the menu, and when the waiter left our table, I noticed a couple enter the room and, without waiting for the waiter, take a seat. The man looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place him. He was about 40, in good shape, and clearly exuded wealth. The woman was around 20, maybe 21 at most, and she seemed out of place, too old to be his daughter, but too young to be his partner. She was holding a large bag, from which she pulled out a tablet and a few other items, then stood up and approached one of the other couples. The conversation took a few minutes. She made some notes on her tablet, and then returned to their table. By that time, the man was already chatting with the waiter, as if they were friends. I also noticed that Ellison was quiet and a bit nervous. Additionally, her phone was on the table, and we have a rule at home: no phones at the dinner table. Something wasn't right. The girl continued to approach other tables, spoke for a few minutes, made notes, and then moved on. The man sat there impassively, talking with the waiter but clearly not placing an order, while I observed my wife, who was clearly distracted by something. The girl finally came to our table and said, "Hello, my name is Judy. I'm a student of psychology and ethics at the college, and I'm conducting a survey that will be part of my graduation thesis. Would you like to participate?" I looked at her and said, "I'm sorry, but my wife and I are here for a special celebration, and I don't want us to be disturbed. Perhaps if you give us your phone number, we can call and do it another time." Her face showed complete confusion. It was as if she had been assured that I wouldn't refuse, and she hadn't prepared for a rejection. My wife quickly stepped in. "Jack, this girl needs our help. I'm sure we can spare a minute of our time." This was strange for my wife, as she couldn't stand such interruptions. I said, "Please not now, we have so much to discuss." But she insisted, saying, "Please, go ahead and ask your questions." I sighed deeply, and then the first question came. "Have you seen the movie Indecent Proposal?" I replied, "No," but my wife said, "No, we haven't, but we know the plot of the movie." I really didn't like this girl, and when I looked at the man she came with, he had stopped talking to the waiter and was now watching our table, something he hadn't done with the others. Judy looked at me, but I refused to meet her gaze, and she said, "Jack, may I call you Jack? How do you feel about such a proposal and its impact on a marriage?" Unable to hold back, I responded, "I get the feeling that you don't care whether I agree to be called Jack or not, but a proposal like that, if accepted by my wife, would lead to an immediate divorce." Ellison lifted her head, but Judy didn't flinch. She continued, "Do you think you have the right to control your wife's body by denying her such a proposal?" I laughed. "Not at all. My answer clearly states that if she accepts the proposal, I won't stop her, but while she's away, taking care of her own business, I'll be at our home splitting bank accounts, packing suitcases, and filing for divorce." Then Judy asked, "And what if the proposal were, say, $2 million? Wouldn't that secure your life? If the offer was structured in such a way that you wouldn't receive a cent if you divorced her, would you change your mind?" I said, "I earn enough to live comfortably. I don't need to make money by selling my wife like a cheap sex doll. Besides, if she accepted that money, I'd refuse it in the divorce. Dirty money doesn't bring happiness." As the conversation continued, I noticed Ellison becoming visibly more uncomfortable. I said, "You've ruined my mood, and I no longer want to eat. Ellison, be ready to leave when I get back." I stood up quickly and walked toward the restrooms. I stopped by the waiter's station and said, "Please cancel the order for our table. The people you let in disturbed us, and I don't want to eat here anymore." The waiter looked at me, "But your bill is being covered by that gentleman for helping with the survey." I was confused, so I just turned and walked to the restroom. I had a bad feeling, and I knew that the other shoe was about to drop. Since my last visit to the restaurant, I knew I could go around the restroom from the back and stand in a spot where I wouldn't draw attention. I stood there watching as my wife typed an SMS on her phone. The man's phone beeped. He picked it up and started typing a reply. When he hit send, my wife's phone beeped. She picked it up, read the message, and started typing again. Then his phone beeped again. I watched this exchange for several minutes, and it became completely obvious that they were texting each other. I returned to the table and asked, "Who's this idiot with Judy?" Ellison glanced around and replied, "I don't know why." I said, "Hope something's off. He just paid for our food. I feel like I know him, but I can't place him. And you seem to be texting with him." Ellison, with a look that undeniably showed she had been caught, stammered he was just trying to be polite after she interrupted our meal. I replied, "I'm in a bad mood, and I've lost my appetite. It's time for us to leave." Ellison grew anxious and suggested, "No, we can't be that rude. Just sit here and relax for a moment, and I'll go to the restroom." I watched her walk away and noticed that she glanced at the man. Then Judy came over to me, sat down, placed her hand on the table next to mine, and said, "One more question. What number do you consider reasonable?" I laughed and placed my hand on hers. She didn't pull it away. I said, "It doesn't matter if she sells her body for $20 or $2 million. An adulteress is still an adulteress." As I said this, I began to squeeze her hand. Her hands were thin and mine were large, so the pressure quickly became painful. She said, "Stop it immediately." I replied, "Not until you tell me what I want to know." By this time, I was close to breaking one of her fingers, and I eased up the pressure but didn't let go. She said, "If you don't stop, I'll scream." I just smiled. "Go ahead, but I bet you won't scream because something's off here, and I doubt you want the trouble that comes with calling the police when I beat the crap out of you. And right now, I'm angry enough to do just that. Now tell me, who is he?" She tried to pull her hand away, and I squeezed it again. This time, a finger cracked under the pressure, and she started to cry. I kept pressing, and that's when the man rushed over. I shouted, "Stay back, or the rest of her fingers will end up the same way." He stopped, and then my wife approached. "What's going on?" I smiled. "Well, Ellison, that's exactly what I'm trying to figure out. Judy, if you want your hand to stay pretty, I suggest you answer my question right now." With tears in her eyes, she answered, "Simon Armitage Jr., I let go of her hand." "Get out of here and never come near me again." I looked at Simon Armitage Jr. and realized who he was. Simon Armitage is the owner of the factory where Ellison works, and this was obviously his eldest son. I had seen him at a few events before, but he was a nobody, only getting a management position at the factory thanks to his father. He had a reputation as a playboy, and rumors swirled that he pursued married women because he thought it made him a bigger man. Ellison came over and sat down. Simon offered us $2 million if I spent the weekend with him. I agreed because it would set us up for life. We could buy a new house without a mortgage, set up trust funds for the kids' college, and start working on our child as soon as next weekend. We wouldn't have to wait for your promotion. I stared silently at the table. "You agreed," she answered. "Yes," just as Simon Armitage Jr. sat down at the table. I didn't move or look at him. Then he said, "I can make all your dreams come true, and all it will cost you is 48 hours of your wife's time. The deal is very simple. I'll transfer $2 million into your joint account on Sunday evening, once she calls me to confirm that you're still at home. If you leave, I'll open an account for Ellison, which you won't be able to touch. It's your choice." I looked at Ellison, but I spoke to him. "You can shove your $2 million where the sun doesn't shine. If my wife wants to become an adulteress, I don't need her or the money. I'm leaving. If she's in the car, we might still be able to save our marriage, but if she's not, I'll pack my things and be gone long before she gets back. So Ellison, it's time to decide. Ellison looked at me defiantly. Jack, I want a child now, not in another 2 years, while you're trying to secure funding. This gives us that chance, and you're about to throw it away. I laughed, which clearly unsettled her. We're not having kids anytime soon. This little stunt has shattered my trust in you to the point where, even if you leave with me now, we'll need years of counseling. But if you go with him, I wouldn't touch your filthy body with a disinfected 20-foot barge pole. I purposely chose that expression, knowing she hated it. Her expression was priceless, and when she spoke, I could see spit flying from her mouth. I hate that. How could you degrade my dignity by saying such a thing about me? I stood up, letting my napkin fall onto the freshly served food, and said, That's more than appropriate because it perfectly describes what I think of this little setup and how I now feel about you. I'm leaving Ellison. It's time to decide. I walked toward the exit, and that idiot tried to stand up, but he lost his balance when I placed my hand on his forehead, pushed him back into his seat, and watched as he tipped backward. I kept walking, and a waiter stepped in front of me, but I raised my hand, signaling him to move aside, and he silently stepped back. I heard Ellison shouting my name as the door closed behind me. I briskly walked to the car, opened the door, and got in. I took a few deep breaths, allowing the tension to drain from my body, then started the engine. I slowly drove past the restaurant. Ellison was still there. I picked up speed and headed home. I took a suitcase off the shelf in the closet and began packing. On autopilot, I had packed all my clothes and toiletries into several suitcases and black bags within an hour. Then the phone rang, and it was Ellison. She said, "How are you, baby? I'm really sorry it turned out this way, but this offer is too good to pass up. I'm going to turn off my phone now, and I'll see you on Sunday around 7. I remained silent, just holding the phone to my ear. The silence was clearly agonizing for her, but I felt numb. She was really going to do this, thinking it was best for us. Then she said, "Listen, we can talk about it on Sunday when I get back. I want to have a baby as soon as possible, and this will secure its future." I simply asked, "And who will be the father?" She was taken aback, but she responded, "You, of course." "Not in this lifetime," I said and hung up. I packed everything, including the rest of my personal belongings, into the car. I logged into online banking, accessed the house deposit account, and withdrew half. Then I visited an online divorce service, filled out the paperwork, paid the fee, and arranged for Ellison to be served on Monday at 8 a.m. As I was leaving the house for the last time, a car pulled up and Ellison jumped out, shouting, "Stop, Jack." Wait, it was just a prank, a late April Fool's joke. The driver turned out to be a jerk. He got out of the car and said, "It was a joke. We thought you'd come back to the restaurant. We've been there for the past 2 hours, and then Ellison got your divorce notice, so we rushed over." I silently looked at Ellison. If this was a joke, it was so bad that it caused irreparable damage to our marriage. I need to leave for a few days and think. With those words, I got into my car. As I started the engine, I heard her shout, "Please, withdraw the divorce papers." By Saturday afternoon, I was sitting at my brother's house with him and his wife, Becky. A few hours earlier, Becky had spoken with Ellison and came back to tell us about it. "Jack," she began, "I don't think it was a joke, but I also don't believe it was a real attempt to sleep with another man. She's so desperate to have children that she's willing to do anything. On the other hand, she wasn't really planning to go through with it. Her idea was to make you say that you had enough money to take care of her, and then she could say, 'Well, if we have enough money, then there's no need to wait to have kids.' He's her friend from work, but trust me, he's not even remotely interested in sex with Ellison. In fact, he'd probably prefer you, but now she realizes that she's created a situation where you've lost all trust in her. The problem is, dragging out this mess has left me uncertain, and I definitely don't want to bring a child into a dysfunctional family. I got up from the table and went to bed at 4 in the afternoon, hoping to have some time to think. By Sunday, my mind hadn't cleared. My real problem is with those 2 hours. If it had truly been a setup, a joke, or an attempt to push her point about having a child, she would have come home immediately. The fact that she didn't means there's something to discuss with Simon. I also didn't buy the claim that Simon would prefer you. I decided to let the divorce papers go through. Whatever happens, happens. A month later, with Simon's help, Ellison found a lawyer, and the court ordered 12 counseling sessions over 4 weeks, 3 per week. We sat in front of the counselor, a young woman who looked at me the same way my first-grade teacher did when I couldn't recite the alphabet. Ellison was eagerly explaining her plan and how it had been devised by Simon. Ironically, Judy really was a psychology student, writing a paper on how men react to stressful situations. I was supposed to be her key example. When Ellison finished, the counselor looked at me and almost spat out her words. "Well, Jack, you've heard the whole story. Why are you insisting on the divorce when your wife wants and needs you? Aha, I thought, Jack's going to have the crap beaten out of him 3 times a week for the next 4 weeks. I looked the counselor in the eye and said, "Do you really believe that? Because I don't. There's a 2-hour black hole in her story. What was she doing from the moment I left the restaurant until she got home? That's plenty of time to book a room, have sex, and come back home." I heard Ellison take a deep breath, and the counselor shifted in her chair. As she started to speak, I said, "I'm not finished yet, and we agreed not to interrupt when someone else is speaking, so I expect you to follow those rules." She never addressed those 2 hours, never gave any explanation or proof. What happened during those 2 hours is the real story of that evening, but all you're talking about is the setup. The counselor was outraged. "You need to work through this, and then you and your wife can rebuild your marriage." I stood up and said, "Your job is to determine whether our marriage can be saved, not to convince me to stay in a marriage I want to leave. If she can't prove to me that nothing happened during those 2 hours, I'm walking out of here." The counselor reported me to the judge for refusing to cooperate, and 2 days later, I found myself back in court. The judge looked me up and down as if he were inspecting something scraped off his shoe. "Why are you refusing to cooperate with the counselor?" I replied, "Perhaps you should listen to the recording of the first session." The counselor stated that I should forget about Ellison's wrongdoing. "Your Honor, it's not the counselor's job to lecture me. I need to know the truth about that evening, but both my wife and the counselor are trying to hide it. Cooperation is a two-way street. If they refuse to answer my questions, then I can't fulfill their request to forgive my wife because I don't know what she's done." The judge thought for a moment, then asked, "What do you want to know?" I quickly answered, "It's simple. There's a 2-hour black hole in her timeline that she refuses to discuss. I want to know what happened during that time. My wife refuses to talk about it, and the counselor says I don't need to know. I'm here today because the counselor wants you to order me to stop asking this question, claiming that by asking it, I'm refusing to cooperate." The judge stroked his chin, looking like a 1920s movie star, then said, "You have the right to know. Please, take a seat. I'd like to call the counselor as a witness." My wife's lawyer, who was there with the counselor, stood up and said, "Your Honor, she's not involved in this case. She has her own role, and she just wants Mr. Samuels to stop obstructing the process." Calling her as a witness won't help. The judge was clearly outraged by this statement and said, "This case was brought by your client and her counselor, claiming that Mr. Samuels is refusing to cooperate. What I see is that Mrs. Samuels is the one refusing to cooperate, and the counselor is covering for her. Either she testifies, or I'll stop the counseling sessions and grant the divorce. What do you choose?" The lawyer and counselor argued heatedly, but in the end, the counselor reluctantly stood and approached the stand. She took the oath, and the judge asked, "Do you know what happened during those 2 hours?" The counselor sat silently until the judge said, "Madam, I remind you that you are under oath and must answer this question." Quietly, so softly I could barely hear, she replied, "Yes, I do." The judge tapped his fingers on the desk, waiting for her to start speaking, and when she didn't, he said, "Please enlighten the court on what happened, and this time speak louder." Mrs. Samuels and Mr. Armitage went to a nearby bar, where they discussed what had happened and how they were going to deal with the consequences. Mrs. Samuels believed that the offer made by Mr. Armitage to her and Mr. Samuels was the quickest way to the large family she had always dreamed of. She expected Mr. Samuels to come back and look for her, but when he sent the divorce notice, she panicked and realized that she shouldn't have put the offer on the table to see if Mr. Samuels would accept it. Now she understands that it was a mistake and wants to forget all about it and move on. The judge laughed and said, "Do you understand what you're saying? You were appointed to Mrs. Samuels not to force Mr. Samuels to comply with her request. You were appointed by the court to determine whether their marriage can be saved." At this point, the counselor interrupted, saying, "But if he can get past the offer and acknowledge that it was rejected, the marriage can be saved." The judge looked over at his glasses and said, "Counselor, I am terminating these sessions because you are not acting independently. Mr. Samuels," he addressed me, "what do you want from this hearing?" My lawyer looked at me, then stood up and said, "My client wants the divorce to proceed." Ellison's lawyer practically jumped out of his seat. "Your Honor, you cannot terminate the hearings on this basis. They must continue. My client wants this marriage to continue." The judge looked at him and said, "If you had played fair, I would have done so, but you turned the counseling sessions into a mockery by trying to hide important information from Mr. Samuels. I will not tolerate that. I grant the divorce." An hour later, I arrived home and found Ellison sitting on the porch in tears. "Why, Jack? All I ever wanted was a big family, and this was just a means to that end." I took her by the hand and led her into the house. "You set me up, lied to me, and treated me like a fool. You know that offer was unacceptable, yet you still tried to go through with it. I can never be with a woman who did that to me. She kept crying, saying, "But I want us to be together. I want 4 kids with you, and I want us to never be in need." I just shook my head. "Go get your $2 million, then find someone else to give you those kids. As for me, I can never be with a woman who thinks that's acceptable. Goodbye, Allison." I opened the door and stepped through it into a new world. Whether it will be better, who knows? I knew that I had made the right decision for myself, but the pain of betrayal was not something that would heal quickly. I drove away from the house, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow, knowing that my life was taking a new direction. The image of Ellison standing there, realizing the consequences of her actions, stayed with me, but I couldn't go back. I spent the next few months focusing on my work and moving forward with my life. The promotion I had worked so hard for finally came through, and I threw myself into my new role. It was challenging, but it kept my mind occupied and away from the mess my personal life had become. I made new friends, reconnected with old ones, and even started dating again, cautiously testing the waters of relationships. I wasn't in a rush to settle down, and I certainly wasn't looking to start a family anytime soon. Ellison, on the other hand, tried to reach out a few times, sending letters and messages through friends, all filled with apologies and regrets. She kept insisting that she only wanted the best for us and that her intentions were to secure our future. But I didn't respond. I knew that forgiveness might come someday, but trust was something I couldn't easily give back. The memory of her betrayal was still too fresh, too raw, and I wasn't ready to pretend that things could go back to the way they were. I heard through mutual friends that Simon Armitage Jr. had moved on quickly after the ordeal, his interest in Ellison fading as soon as it became clear that she was no longer a challenge or a conquest. He went back to his playboy lifestyle, chasing other married women and throwing his father's money around to impress them. Ellison's dream of a big family and a secure future seemed further away than ever, and she was left to pick up the pieces of her life alone. As time passed, I realized that the love I had for Ellison had been replaced by something else, perhaps a sense of closure, or maybe just the relief of knowing I was no longer part of a toxic relationship. I could finally see a future that wasn't clouded by her lies or the pain of her betrayal. I could finally breathe without the weight of uncertainty holding me down. I began to focus on what I truly wanted from life. The idea of a family was still appealing to me, but only with someone who shared my values, someone who believed in loyalty and honesty. I wasn't willing to compromise on that again. I learned to be patient, to wait for the right person, rather than settling for someone who would betray my trust at the first opportunity. One day, while I was out with friends, I met someone new. She was kind, smart, and had a genuine smile that reminded me what it felt like to be happy again. We took things slow, getting to know each other without the pressure of rushing into anything. For the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about the future, and I knew that whatever happened next, it would be on my own terms, with someone who truly deserved my trust. As for Ellison, I wished her no ill will. In the end, I hoped she would find the happiness she was looking for, even if it meant we had to go our separate ways. Life is too short to dwell on what could have been, and I was ready to move on, to build a life that was based on truth, respect, and mutual love. I had finally learned that I was worth more than what she had offered, and that was the greatest victory of all. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.